Hello guys, welcome back to the SN Studio. I'm here today, the Wizard is here today, to talk about the top 10 changes coming in 10th edition, in my opinion. So obviously we've got a bunch of 10th edition content coming, but I wanted to do a video talking about what I feel are the top 10 changes coming into Warhammer 40k, especially as a competitive player, because obviously I love my competitive games, I go to a lot of events, so I am obviously the competitive side of SN, so we say, and a lot of these rules have a lot of changes which are going to affect players going to events and how they'll actually approach the game, which is really awesome because 9th edition has been a great game to play and I'm looking forward to seeing how things will change in 10th. So going up next, we're going to go straight into it and see what is first on the list. All right, so leaders and the lone operative ability. This is a really interesting change to 10th edition. So in 9th edition, the way characters worked was that you had the lookout sir rule. So what this meant is that while your character unit or character model was within 3 inches of a unit that contained 3 or more models, they couldn't be targeted unless they were the closest unit. So this allowed you to have your characters, you know, almost out in the open, giving all the buffs and the auras that they have and be protected from enemy fire. But obviously once they got close up, you could charge them, start fighting them as normal, and they could end up being killed. 10th is a bit different. So first things first, we have the leader ability. So a lot of HQs, a lot of these, you know, small elite characters, a lot of the characters that are, you know, currently HQs, but maybe not the big bosses of the factions, have the leader ability. This allows them to join a unit, which becomes their bodyguard unit, and basically becomes part of that unit. This is a really cool addition. This is a callback to early editions like 7th edition, which allows you to have these character units. They provide buffs on the bodyguard unit, so for example, +1 to hit, or +1 to hit, etc. And the actual unit acts as ablative wounds for the actual character, so it's like a symbiotic relationship. I think this is an awesome change. It allows characters to better have targeted and focused buffs on units rather than just, you know, generating all these auras with all these characters around. And certain characters will have specific roles, which I think is great because, you know, a lot of the times we'll see certain characters be, you know, dominating certain lists, and then there's a lot of these other characters you just don't see because they don't really have a role. Here, I think because they've done an amazing job of actually having these leader abilities, it makes every single character a bit more worthwhile. Also, it allows these characters to be very, very well protected, and even in combat, your opponent has to start killing through their bodyguards before they can actually hit the character, unless they have the precision special rule, which allows them to target them. The second thing is lone operative. So these bigger characters we're talking about, you know, Guilliman, etc., as previewed before, they have what's known as the lone operative ability, which is similar to the old lookout sir, except that they can't be targeted unless they're within 12 inches. This means that they could be standing out the open next to a unit. I believe something like Guilliman was previewed saying Adeptus Astartes units, and they can't be shot unless they're within 12. This means that these characters can be out in the open to give their buffs, and once your opponent gets within 12, then they can start to be targeted. So it allows your characters to be a lot more survivable, in my opinion, while being able to hand out all these buffs in the ways that you can use them. And I think in competitive play specifically, what's going to be interesting is finding out which units work best with which leaders and being able to actually, you know, merge them together and come up with really cool combos. Changes to terrain. This is a big one. So currently in 40k, there's loads of different terrain rules. They're a lot simpler in 10th edition. Basically, there is something called the benefit of cover. And the benefit of cover gives you +1 to your armor save unless you have a 3-up save or better and you're being shot by AP0. All types of terrain will give you the benefit of cover in different ways. So for example, a forest or a wood, if you are within it, you are receiving the benefit of cover. If you are within a ruin, you're receiving the benefit of cover, etc. Gone are the days of dense cover. That is completely gone. Light cover is now just the benefit of cover. There's no more heavy. And also terrain features such as craters no longer give -2 to your move. They just give you the benefit of cover. It's a much simpler way of terrain being used. It standardizes a lot of terrain. So obviously, as a competitive player now, whatever piece of terrain you're on, you're either getting the benefit of cover or you're not. There's no other weird things you have to think about of which type of cover you're using. It's just standard like that. Obscuring is still a thing. If you are behind a ruin, you will be obscured unless you have the towering keyword. So that is still something that's part of the game. But apart from obscuring, the only other part of cover is this benefit of cover. I love how stratagems are in 10th. Firstly, every single detachment just has 6. That's it. So if you are playing Chaos Space Marines and their detachment, whatever it's called when we see the index, They have 6 stratagems. That's it, which really allows you as a player to know your army inside and out. You don't have to remember all 50 stratagems you used to have. You just have 6. And as an opponent as well, you know that your opponent only has a few things they can do, which is really nice. Secondly, I just want to point out that stratagems are beautifully laid out in this edition. It tells you when you use the ability, what it's used on, and what exactly happens. They're really easy to read, really well laid out, and I think that just makes, especially in competitive play, but also in just general play, it makes the game a lot easier to read, a lot easier for new players, and just work out really smoothly. Okay, so Battle Shock. This is a huge change. This is really different. So previously we had the morale phase where models would flee and run away from the battlefield. That is completely gone. Now in your command phase, units that are below half strength have to take a Battle Shock test. And there are other ways that units can take a Battle Shock test. What this means is that they have to roll above their leadership. And if they fail, they are Battle Shocked, which is a pretty huge debuff. It means that they cannot use stratagems on that unit. Their objective control, which we'll get to in a second, goes to 0, and if they want to fall out of combat, they have to take a desperate escape test, or they could suffer penalties, not be able to fall back, etc. So it's a very big thing, Battle Shock, especially happening in the command phase now, meaning that the morale phase is gone. This is interesting not just for what Battle Shock is, but it means that with morale going, a lot of armies that used to struggle with morale, having lots of models run away, etc., that won't be the case. They'll still get these debuffs, but they won't end up having half their army just run to morale, which thematically also makes sense. I mean, a Space Marine might get a bit scared, but he's not going to run away. So I'm really excited to try out Battle Shock and see exactly the ins and outs of it and how it affects different armies. Moving on from the previous section is objective control. So currently every model counts as 1 unless they have a special rule. For objective purposes, for controlling an objective, a unit just counts as 1. And then there is the objective secured rule, usually held by troops, that allow you to gain priority over objectives. That's all gone in 10th. Now every single unit, every model has an objective control value. This is essentially how many models it counts for control of the objective. So a troop may have an OC of 2, an elite unit like a Terminator may have an OC of 1, and some big units like Knights may have an OC of like 10. So this is really cool because it makes more sense when units are going to fight over an objective for certain units to have more control than others. And in competitive play, it's really interesting because now when you're building your army, you want to make sure that you have enough OC in your army to actually be able to contest objectives and take objectives, because your opponent may have 5 elite characters on there that counts as OC 5, but if you put 3 troops, that's 6. But then if you put a vehicle on, that's an extra 8. So you're going to start working out all these objective control, which I think is really cool because it means that every unit will have their value playing the mission depending on their objective control as well, which is really nice. And as I said, it ties into Battle Shock because when a unit is Battle Shocked, their objective control is 0, which means it doesn't matter if you have 40 models in an objective and your opponent has 1. If you're Battle Shocked, you can't contest that objective, which is really interesting. So it's really important that you look at your objective control of units and make sure it's nice and high. Okay, so the psychic phase is gone. It's just gone, which is a big change. I've been playing 40k since 7th, so for me, I've always had a psychic phase. It's very different now to not have one. But yeah, psychers now have what's known as like psychic weapons and psychic abilities, which means that a lot of psychers will have an actual weapon profile for a psychic attack, which they will make like any other attack. And usually they'll have regular profiles and more empowered profiles, which grant them the hazardous keyword, which basically means that they'll take mortal wounds or die if they roll a 1 at the end of the test. This basically means that a lot of these psychers are going to have abilities that previously were in their psychic tree as weapons, which is an interesting change. And the second thing they'll have is these psychic abilities. So we've seen, I believe they previewed the Farseer earlier, that has a little, I believe it's fortune that they put in a unit. So you have to roll a test. If it's passed, you just give it to a unit. So there's no real psychic, there's no psychic test or anything like that, but psychic characters are still really important. And remember, a lot of them have the leader keyword, so they'll be going into units, be able to hand out buffs to their own units, or be able to deal out these powerful psychic attacks from the protection of their own bodyguard unit. So it's going to be a bit different, and we're going to see how it goes. But I'm actually really interested to see all these different psychers and what type of abilities they actually have. Okay, so consolidation is a type of movement which is, in my opinion, quite skill intensive in 40k because it allows you to gain extra movement. It allows you to be able to get into better positions after your combat. Now, currently, you're able just to get closer to the model, so it allows you to essentially, some people talk about like fanning round models. This is different in 10th. If a model is able to consolidate, it has to go base to base with an enemy model. If it can't go base to base, it's able to consolidate onto an objective, but only if it gains control of that objective. It actually moves onto it. If neither is true, a unit can't consolidate, which means that a lot of these movement shenanigans, should we say, kind of are gone, but in a different way. Because now, when you charge, when you fight, you want to put yourself in a position where you're able to get to base, so you can consolidate, or you're able to move off onto an objective. If, for example, you kill your opponent off, they're no longer there, you can no longer just move closer to the enemy, you have to either move into base to base or onto the objective. And if neither is true, you have to stay still. So consolidation is going to take some getting used to, but it's definitely different, and a lot of these little movement tricks are going to be very different in 10th. Okay, so flyers work a little bit different in 10th edition. So some flyers don't have hover, which is a rule I get to in a second. So those flyers have to start in strategic reserves. Flyers that have the hover special rule can choose to either start on the board or in reserve. If they start on the board, their movement is 20 inches, and they can be put in reserves or they can start on the board in deployment. If they decide to not be in hover mode, their movement is 20 plus, so 20 infinity, but they have to start in strategic reserves. This is really interesting because it means that you can put your flyers in reserves, bring them on second turn as regular deep strike reserves, as a counter punch, a beta punch, etc. Or you can start them on the board, which is very interesting because you can have them on the board, and if you go first, you can have a pretty big alpha strike, moving 20 and having your gunship shoot, etc. Or if you go second, some units have ways of redeploying, etc. You may be able to put them back into reserves, which is really interesting. Secondly, we know from what GW have shown us that with transports, you're able to move and then get out of the transport. You're not able to charge unless you have certain keywords and rules. I believe it's assault vehicle, but you are able to move out and shoot. So if you start on the board in a transport flyer, you can move the flyer, get out and shoot turn one, and the flyer can shoot. So there's a lot of alpha potential coming for hover keyword aircraft, and I think there's going to be a lot of looking into, and especially in competitive play, I think you're going to see a lot more aircraft than you currently do. Okay, so actually one of my personal favorite changes is the introduction, once again, of universal special rules. So this was something that was prominent in 7th edition, was actually what's currently in the Horus Heresy, which obviously you can see Mr. Pardo and DC play quite a bit, which is the fact that a lot of these units have special keywords which are consistent throughout 40k. So we've already seen sustained hits, we've seen precision, we've seen lethal hits, we've seen devastating wounds, all of these abilities, which whether you're a Space Marine, an Orc, a Tyranid, your weapon, if it has devastating wounds, it does the same thing for everybody. This is an amazing change because a lot of these abilities, let's say sustained hits, means exploding sixes in combat. But if your ability was called Death to Macragge, then you'd get exploding sixes in combat. But if you tell your opponent that, they wouldn't know what it means. And you'd have to explain it, and then, not all the rules are always worded the same, etc. With it just being sustained hits, so in this case sustained hit 1, for example, both you and your opponent will know exactly what it means, and it just means that the game will flow a lot smoother, a lot more rules are easier to pick up and play. And if you're someone in the competitive scene, for example me, you're able to pick up another army that you might want to play in a different event, and you read those special rules, and they'll be the same rules as they were in your previous army, and it'll be a lot easier for people that want to multi-army and play all these different parts of the hobby, which is awesome, right? Because, having these special rules, and I think there's a bunch, there's about 20 or so, but they will be consistent, and I think hopefully, keeping this throughout the rest of 10th will mean the game will be a lot smoother and a lot simpler. But simplified, not simple, as they say. So the last thing I want to talk about quickly is detachments and specifically enhancements. So obviously every single army will have their army rule, but within the army rule, we're going to be getting detachments which you can actually build your army from. This is essentially what your sub-factions are now, and they will give you a main ability rule, and they'll give you your 6 stratagems, and they'll be giving you enhancements. So what previously was warlord traits and relics up until 9th edition now is gone. They are just enhancements. So we're going to be getting 4 for each one. You can choose up to 3. To have in your army. They are paid points upgrades that you can give to units that essentially are, water traits and relics in that sense, what they are, and they can be given to non-named characters. This is really interesting because it means that you're not spending, like previously, pre-game CP in order to give your characters all these buffs. You are just spending points. It's something you write into your list. And I think that, enhancements, from what we've seen, are very powerful abilities that are actually going to really change up certain characters. And as we've seen with characters being leading units, you can come up with some really powerful units that are led by even more powerful characters. So I'm really excited to see all these enhancements and what they can do. So there you have it. Those are my top 10 changes coming in 10th edition, what I feel is going to affect competitive play and affect play in general. So thank you very much for watching. Look out for loads more content coming in 10th. We've got all the index coming up and all the other rules and everything as they start coming out. So I can't wait to see you there, and catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.